Please.
Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back
to the i.B.Artin podcast. If you missed last week, make sure you go ahead and check that out.
Please.
We talked about representation and all things, revolving around that, and it was a very, very good episode. So
It was lengthy.
She was a little long, but all good substance.
With that being said, let's get into it.
Let's get into it, y'all. This episode is very personal, I feel like, for
the both of
Mars
us.
and I.
Yeah.
We're getting into a lot of issues that deal with access, and a lot of our personal experience. It's just been a lot of emotional unpacking
For sure.
that comes along with this too. So
Yeah.
we wanted to start with a question. Did you want to ask it?
Yeah, sure. So I guess our question to you all and for each other is, was there a time when you experienced the pressures of the reality of lack of access to an arts education as a Black person seeking a creative career, or even just your creative interests?
Mm-hmm. And before we get into our personal answers, when you're thinking about this question for yourself, like, really challenge yourself, I would say, to look back and like compare your perceptions of the world and of your field when you were young to how you see it now.
Yeah.
We're going to be doing a lot of comparison ourselves. And so, I would just ask that you challenge yourself.
Challenge your thinking.
Yeah.
Like what you thought you knew, what you do know now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we both can agree that when we were working on or planning out this episode, we were thinking about like what we thought back then and how we perceived our lack of access as children versus now that we're adults and we know the facts.
Yeah, we know the things, the systematic things that are in place that kept us from, having access as children. So,
and even familial things that like maybe wasn't explained to us as children, which you'll
gonna get
see
into it, y'all.
when we get into it. But yeah, just think about that. And even for those who maybe just be looking at this from a low income perspective, if you maybe don't identify as Black, for those as well, like there are still systemic aspects for you. So definitely, regardless of who you identify as a listener, challenge your thinking as we kind of go through our own personal experiences, and with this question especially. It might sting a little bit.
Right.
It might sting a little bit.
Exactly. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and get into it. I'll let Mars share her story first.
Okay.
Like her answer to this question, and then I'll get into my own.
Yeah. So for me, I don't think I really was faced with access issues within the arts until high school. And that's because like my instructor in elementary school and middle school, whether it was the in school one or the family friend instructor, there really wasn't any like push for when it came to like upkeep with as an instrumentalist. So that's kind of where.
And by upkeep, sorry, you mean like strings, having a place to string, your bow hair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So like rebowing your hair, even just getting a new instrument, getting new strings, replacing your strings, things like that, which I didn't find out till later, like in high school. As soon as I entered high school, those weren't things that like I had been told about or mentioned to about, because I mean, I think they still viewed me as a child at that point. But come high school, and it's a performing arts high school, they're like, yeah, we're looking at you as if you're a practicing artist. So whereas you need a new violin,
what have you been
baby.
doing? Right, you're behind, girl.
No, yeah. So like for me specifically within high school, I think I dealt with a lot of pressure from both my orchestra director and also my private instructor that we were given. Like I only had access to private lessons my senior year because of the fact that was a part of that came with the school.
Was required.
Like as an instrumentalist, as a music major, you're automatically given a private instructor because they want to make sure everybody can get with that upkeep, um, and mostly stay with like their skill,
Mm-hmm.
the upkeep of their skill. Let me say that, not the instrument. That didn't come with the school.
Yeah, they said, you gotta do that on your own.
Right. Crying. No,
Right.
so I think the first thing that I specifically remember, that still like sits in me a little bit to
Mm-hmm.
this day, is there was this orchestra that my high school orchestra director, he conducted outside of our school, and it's about roughly an hour away. It's a youth orchestra, really great orchestra. He constantly talked about it, and he was always encouraging us to audition. And so I didn't do it my freshman year because I was just trying to get acclimated, get accustomed to
Mm-hmm.
everything. But I did either my sophomore year or my junior year. I want to say it was my sophomore year. I auditioned and I got in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, based off of like what I'd seen from the audition, the students who are auditioning, I was maybe like one of five black students
Mm-hmm.
already. But what I didn't know going into this audition and trying to be a part of this orchestra, and you would assume that like this had been disclosed by our orchestra director.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know this until I got my acceptance letter of
You have to
okay,
pay
yeah,
for
the deposit for this orchestra is $500.
that. Wasn't like in like any like documents or
No,
on the website where, oh, if you want to sign up, do
nothing,
this. That's crazy.
nothing. It was like sign up,
Yeah.
go ahead, yeah. And then you get in, and they're like, "Yeah, so to actually be a part of this, you need to pay
Go
$500.
ahead, pay it, babe.
Give me the money.
Yeah.
Give
But it's
me
like,
the money."
girl, she's not in the account.
Right. And I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Literally crazy. And like at this point, it's just my mom and I. Like it's not doing the whole multifamily thing
Mm-hmm.
at this point in my life, and so it's just my mom and I, and we can't afford that.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously, like my orchestra director knew I got in. But and like I told him, I was like, I can't, join, like I can't afford that.
Yeah.
And
And that really sucks.
that
When, like,
did suck.
You've been working towards something or you want something so bad just to then, after you get it, you're met with financial barriers.
Yeah.
Like,
And then you can't do it. And it's like, you're good enough to be there.
but it's just the fact that you can't afford it.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
And, he still was like, I really wish you could do it. Da 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 da. But then here's the catch. Here's the catch. Ooh, baby. And I have some listeners that I went to high school with, so if they know, they know. LOL.
It's coming out.
Yeah, right. So the other part of this is like it's a symphony youth orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, for those who do not know, there is a band aspect. There's a certain set of band instruments that are also playing with the orchestra, including like percussionists. Now because not a lot of people auditioned for the band portion or the percussion portion, my orchestra director would, for those who were interested, at least he'd like ask them, and if they said yes, they do it. He would bring them from our school to the orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
And no, they did not have to pay this deposit at all.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were a string person and you auditioned, you got in, you paid that.
Mm-hmm.
You had to pay that money. But
the
other people who didn't,
they didn't have to.
Yeah.
He was just like, oh, I'm gonna like vouch for you, essentially.
not even just vouch. Like he was like, all right, you're gonna be a part of this,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just a part of it.
Yeah.
Like it was like a volunteer thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were part of that and you agreed, he'd, you could ride with him
He went
after
the extra
school.
mile to make sure that you could get there.
Yeah.
You could participate.
Yeah, and I'm like, I feel like if you're going to, me personally, is like I didn't understand why. If you're going to do that, and you're encouraging students to audition for this orchestra, and it's not like it was already a small orchestra, maybe 1 to 2, maybe 1 to 3 of us would audition each year, if not in general. If you're gonna omit 6 band people, including percussionists, 6 band people, you might as well
Make
omit
a way
like
for
3
the
string people. 3.
Especially if it's a small number of them.
Right.
Also, if you have made it known that, hey, I have there are financial barriers in place that are keeping me
Doing this.
from doing this. Like, is there any way that an exception can be made that I can still be a part of it?
Right.
But like, that wasn't made known.
That
to
wasn't
you?
nothing.
Mm.
Nothing. It was just, oh, dang, I wish you could do it. I was like,
Oh, that's
right.
too
Do you?
bad.
Do you, babe? Do you wish? But, you know, that was kind of the first instance that kind of like hit me in the gut a
Mhm.
little bit. But I was like, you know what? Whatever. Forget it. We
Yeah.
ball.
Yeah,
we ball.
keep going.
But one that was more, I guess, continual over my 4 years in high school was, and this is like no shade to any of these instructors whatsoever. Like, you're doing your job. But my private instructor at the time, like, you know, I could be working on this really hard piece, and she's like, you know, you have it down, but it's your instrument that's holding you back from actually producing the sound that you could create. And, you know, she's constantly saying, oh, you need to get a new violin, da 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 da. And I like actively telling her, like, yeah, I can't really afford that. And she's like, oh, go to this place. And they have like a rent, not rent to own, not rent to buy or rent to own. It was like rent to this certain amount. And then that once you hit that amount, we will put that towards your total cost for violin. And so go to this place. Their minimum cost for violin is like $1,300.
Yeah, violins are
expensive.
Pricey. Yeah.
If you didn't know, now you know.
Yeah.
They're expensive,
Yeah.
baby. And the deposit amount is $800. So
baby, we got that in a bank either.
Even once you hit that $800, you're still coming out at a minimum $300 to $500 out of pocket. And it's like, again, where do you think I have that money?
Yeah.
Where? Like, my mom and I were only even able to start renting that instrument. Wasn't even able to do that until the summer before I went to undergrad.
So wait, you had to reach that amount until it was like classified into like rent status, or
no,
until you paid like that out of pocket?
So we weren't able to even like, I wasn't renting from this place during high school. During high school, I had my own violin that like I'd had since middle school.
Oh, income wise, you weren't able to rent one until
after.
You weren't financially able to rent one. I
wasn't financially able to rent one because I already, one, with music and arts had a situation where you could do rent to own. So we did that from like elementary to middle school. And then we hit that amount where I could own it, but they let me pick like a new one at the same cost. And of course, since we've already done all the payments and now it's rent to own, I now own that violin. And that's the violin I had, but it was still, you know, still holding back my sound for what I could have been. And so being told like throughout high school, oh, you need a new violin, but I do not have
you can't
money to like go to an actual strings organization like or business for violin, cello, viola, any of that until after I graduated from high school. And even then, that instrument that I got, I still have. Because again, who has the funds?
Yeah, to like keep replacing violins.
Mind you, stuff. The place is in DC, which if you know me, you know that's like roughly an hour 15 away from where I live. But if you don't, now you know. Yeah. It's about an hour 15 from where I live.
In general, yeah.
Well, in Maryland.
Oh,
this is all, yes, okay. Maryland. In Maryland. I'm not buying an instrument from here. Yeah. If you think it's expensive in Maryland,
no, it'll be way worse in New York.
It's deadly in New York. Nonetheless, so that was already an issue of like, cool, thank you for constantly telling me that I am poor.
Yeah, and it sucks because you know that when people suggest and say, oh, you know, maybe you should get new instruments, or in my case, like get more dance sites that don't have holes in them, like get new leotards, whatever, ones that, you know, are a little bit more professional, I guess. They don't mean to, it doesn't come from a place of like oh, I'm gonna rub in your face that you probably like don't have money to afford it, but
it's like a constant reminder.
Yeah, it's a
constant reminder, and it's like, I know you're reminding me because you like to think it's not on my radar as, you know, a child.
Yeah, and you just want me to like have like the
something
best,
better.
yeah, something better because you see that I have potential and all of this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like I appreciate it. I appreciate you, you know, giving me these resources, and I don't have to like do the work of like trying to find somewhere and figure out what would work, what's best.
Right.
You're actively giving me like, okay, go here. They have good quality instruments, materials, whatever.
But it's when your lived experience doesn't match or like meet the expectations of like the art form that you're practicing. Like
exactly.
That's when it's like, oh, like can I keep doing this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was that, and then the other one being like, there was a youth orchestra camp that not really like a neighboring town, I guess. They're like 40 minutes away. And the name of the school is Shenandoah. Shenandoah University, I think. I think that's
that
the
sounds
school.
right.
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
Sounds like a school.
More or less. I know it's definitely Shenandoah. I just don't know if it's like, you know what? Whatever, semantics. So they do a youth summer camp, and you don't get private lessons, but they'll do like sectionals, and you're working on repertoire, you're working on your skills, all of that. And, you know, private instructor each year would encourage me to do it. Again, we don't have the money for that. And it's like 2 weeks, I think. So one, there's the access with like having adults that are able to drive you 40 to 45 minutes away every morning, despite, you know, they also have to work. So usually starting at a time after they have to be at work. So there's that access. And then on top of that, the money, the literal money for it. And it'd be sad to like, yeah, I want to do this, but I financially cannot do it. Even though it would help. And, you know, she's one of the instructors there. Another private instructor at the school, he was also working there. They still work there.
And I feel like it sucks when, say, if your friends are doing it too, and year after year, and they keep asking you like, oh, you should do it, you should try it, right?
And like, don't go on vacation. It's like, babe, I don't go on vacation anyway.
I just stay at home.
It's like, I work every summer.
We ain't got the money to do that either.
Right, I'm working.
Yeah, but like you have like the your friends are like, do it, and it's like, I want to so bad, but then you also, like, I know in my experience, I never shared with them like, oh, I can't afford it, you know. It was just like, oh no, I'm gonna go to this different studio, or I'm gonna go to this, or just stay at home, whatever,
right?
Or, you know, work or something.
That's your only option,
right?
Yeah. So overall, it's just eventually realizing like it's incredibly hard to afford the maintenance as like I can only speak as a strings person, as a strings player, that for that specific instrument, and really any strings instrument, like the upkeep for that already costs so much.
Yeah, art is so much more than just like the performance.
Yeah,
you know,
it's
what
way
you
more
see.
than that.
It's
it's more than the personal aspect of like our skill. It's also the upkeep, because you could be great, but if you have a crappy violin, like, your sound is only going to be as good as the violin can allow for you to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And
which then leads to less opportunities for you down the line, because if you keep auditioning, and you may be just as good, but if they see someone that has a nicer violin, you know,
and they're just as good as you,
exactly, then 9 times out of 10 they're going to go with that person instead of you,
right? Because they're like, well, your
sucks.
violin isn't like allowing you to be as great as you are.
Yeah,
this person has that already, so we pick them.
Yeah, no, my situation, I was in 7th grade, and again, it relates to like money and all that stuff. But yeah, I was in 7th grade, and at this age, I didn't realize, and we'll get into this a little bit later too, but I didn't realize that the way the system is set up, and like, you know, the systemic things, you know, the racism that exists is what put, you know, my family in this situation, you know. So I'm just like an innocent 7th grader, you know,
right.
Unaware of that. And so anyway, getting into it, In 6th grade, in middle school in general, was when I started like taking dance more seriously. I went to performing arts middle school as well as a high school. And once I got into 7th grade was like advanced dance. And I was like, okay, like we're doing this thing for real now. And so from then, from then up until, sorry, from when I was little and first got into dance around age 3 up until middle school, I had never even heard of a dance studio before. Like I
Mm.
literally did not know that people went to dance studios to get dance training. Like I just assumed everyone did it in church, cuz I mean, we talked about this in church, taught me how to art. Like
Yeah.
that was what was around me 24/7. Like I'm in a church house like 4 or 5 days a week, you know, doing praise dance and whatever and other ministries I'm involved in. But yeah, I was completely unaware that dance studios were a thing. And so once I got into advanced dance, you know, I'm around more advanced dancers. These people, they trained outside at studios outside of school, as well as
Mhm.
the training that they were receiving in the public
Yep.
education school. And so there was a point where I really wanted to get on point. And I don't do point today. Broke my foot, but
Yeah, you told
right,
me about that.
broke
Yeah.
my foot. But
Woo.
at this time, I was like, I want to be a ballet dancer, like so bad, you know, so beautiful, whatever. Um, and but a lot of the students, you didn't really get placed on point within the middle school program. You got
Mhm.
placed on point outside at a studio, right?
Right.
And so at this point, my friends, they were like, Kira, like you gotta join our studio. They went to this studio called Westview, and it's in Bel Air, and baby, Bel Air is expensive, girl. Like
It
it
sounds
is,
expensive.
it's so expensive. And the Westview studio, I don't know what the monthly fee was to attend the studio, but I just
Mhm.
know it was way
Unaffordable.
beyond what we could afford, right? Um, and so I found a different studio that was a little bit closer to our school, and it was significantly cheaper. I think it was around like $80 a month, but even then, that was still very expensive for my family. And my mom was a single mom of 3, and we lived with her and my grandmother,
Mhm.
and so 5 of us in the household. Very, you know, she didn't have the job that she has now, so like
Right.
the level of income was significantly like lower, and you know she's trying to feed 5 mouths, put gas in the car, take us to school, like working on a full-time schedule. Like it was a lot. So she found the studio, and I went to school and I told my friends, I was like, oh, I can't go to your studio, but I can go to this one. And immediately it was like, that studio sucks, like that's so bad, like their training is crappy, like like all of this stuff.
Mhm.
And I was kind of just like, well, yeah, like
It's like
back then
right.
I was like feeding, you know, like feeding into it and like believing all of the stuff that they said. And yes, obviously, when I compare these two facilities, like they are significantly different, especially
Mhm.
like just looking at the area that they're in.
Mhm.
But at the same time, like my experience within the dance studio, I loved it. Like
Right.
I didn't care that it was more grungy or whatever compared to the other studio. Like I was grateful for it because I was at a studio for the very
Right.
first time in my life, and I was able to get on point at some point. But it was just like we couldn't we couldn't afford the nicer
Right.
studio. We couldn't do it. And I remember I was so mad at my mom, like so furious at her because I didn't see it as you can't afford it because of X, Y, and Z, because of
Right.
like history, or because of, you know, it's harder for her to get a job because of her work experience or whatever. I didn't see
Mhm.
it that way. I just saw it as, mom, you don't want me to go to the studio because you don't want to pay for it. You know,
Right.
like and to this day, when I think back on all of the thoughts that I had in that time, I feel so bad. Like I should be like, mommy, I'm so sorry. Like I didn't mean to think that. Like you didn't know I was thinking this, but that's
Right.
what I
It's
was
like, but that's what
thinking.
happened.
Right. But I just felt so bad because yeah, like I wasn't aware. And I feel like so many um potentially so many like children around that
Mhm.
age that, you know, maybe have experienced the same thing that we did when we were younger, like they too are unaware that it's a bigger thing, it's a bigger issue as to why they aren't able to go to the same studio as their friend or afford these violin lessons or piano lessons or
Right.
art lessons, whatever it is. They might be experiencing that that internal battle, and I don't wish that upon anyone, because you just feel so like, or I just felt so helpless. Like I was like, I know I need to go to a studio, but I can't afford it. But then my
Right.
friends are like pressuring me, you need to go to one, and I just want to be like, everyone back off, like
Like, just let me live.
just
let me live.
just let me live. And it came to a point where I stopped going to the studio, like, because of money, you know.
Right.
And again, $80 is probably like,
Still a lot.
it's still a lot, but it's the cheapest I think someone could pay to go
For
to a
studio,
studio
yeah.
monthly, you know. And so yeah, it just it just really sucked.
It did. And I feel like when it comes to any kind of upkeep, or like even if it's upkeeping your skill, it feels like, it already feels bad if like you're getting pressure from instructors, but I think also getting pressure from your peers, because now it's like, okay, they're now looking a little bit into my life of being like, oh, well, why aren't you doing this?
Yeah, I'm starting to get exposed.
Yeah,
you know,
and
like,
it's like,
and
well,
and I
dang.
feel like when you go to school, like, you don't typically talk about your personal life unless you've like really built trust and had these friends like
Yeah.
year after year. But when you first go into a new dance class, it's the start of the semester, I'm dancing with new people, like, I'm not gonna let them, they're not gonna know anything about me
At
you know.
all.
They'll,
It's like,
they'll
we're here to
know
dance.
what we're here to dance.
We're here to dance. We're here to play.
They will know that what I have for lunch. They will know that I have fruit roll-ups in my lunch kit, you know. But
Right.
like, I'm not gonna be like, oh yeah, like my mama la 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 la, or like, no, I'm not.
It's like, this is not what we're doing.
Right, that's not what
this
we're gonna.
is.
That's not exactly
That's
what
not
this
what
is.
this
Yeah, but once these situations come in place where it's like, oh, okay, now I can't do the thing that you want me to do because of X, Y, and Z.
Right.
That's when the feeling of like, oh, I feel exposed. I feel like just so vulnerable. I felt so vulnerable because I didn't have. There was nothing I could say to convince them that, you know, this studio what was best for my family, and there was nothing I could say to convince my mom to enroll me into this other studio that my friends wanted me to go to. So when we were planning out this episode, something that came up was feeling blocked and behind once we got into the more like professional side, and once we felt more developed as an artist. And so Mars, do you want to like speak to that?
I think it definitely creates this feeling of feeling blocked, feeling behind, feeling othered a little bit, even if it's not intentional. And I can definitely speak to my experience. At least it was never intentional because they didn't know. Like, my peers didn't know.
They didn't know.
My instructors maybe did, but my peers didn't know, and they weren't gonna know. I think the only person who maybe had an idea or knew a little bit was like my god sister, because she also went there.
Yeah.
She was a year younger than me. Shout out to her. Hi.
Hey girl.
Fun fact, her name is also Kira.
Oh,
so.
Period. The best name in the world.
Right. Anyway, I think she had an idea, but like outside of her, I don't know if like my other friends did or not. So like her, I think it took a minute for me to be okay with her knowing in some way, shape, or form. Like, we never had that conversation explicitly. But with my other peers, it's like, no, they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell them that, because like, that's really not their business. That's not, even if they were someone that I'm like, we locked in
really
for lifers, and there are some who I'm still very close with.
They still don't
really know
of that, like,
that challenge that like I had in high school. And so of course it like changed for me a little bit in undergrad, and things were better. I was able to do a little bit more upkeep myself. But had I just been depending like solely on my mom or the occasional help from like my grandparents, that the upkeep I was able to do in undergrad myself, I wouldn't have been able to do.
I always say to my friends, like, when I'm, when we're talking about traumatic experiences,
Ooh.
I'm always like, but you know what? Character development. Like, I
Right.
always mention that as character development because, like you said, there are a lot of moments when I have to learn how to make a way for myself.
Precisely.
And I feel like those challenges really taught me, okay, if I can't afford to go to the studio, then I'm going to have to look at YouTube videos and
Right.
see what I can be learning. Like, I have to put in that extra work. On the flip side, kind of like what I got to do with accounting, girl. We got to read.
We're not even gonna get into it. We're not gonna get into
We
it.
got to do the notes after class because
But
we
just
got to
know
teach ourselves. But it's like,
we're fighting for our lives.
I hate accounting. I hate accounting so much. But anyway, it's like you have to put in that extra work, and having that feeling of being blocked and behind led to a lot of frustration for me when I got into undergrad. Like,
Yeah.
again, I told you, I wasn't aware that studios existed until I was in 7th grade. And so when I got to undergrad, everybody was talking about what studio they went to. And
boy.
I was so mad, but I was also mad that I was mad because I was like, I don't want them to feel, I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad for being able to go to a studio because I want that for everybody. I want that
Right.
for me, but seeing the reality and like seeing like it all like fleshed out in front of me and seeing how these dancers were more flexible or had better technique than I did, like it was so hard because a lot of it came from their ability to go to studios consistently, like every day after class. And I'm like, y'all going to studios, I'm going to church, like. And it didn't help that I was the only Black person. I mentioned this in our other episode. I was a Black person in my dance class too. Like, oh my gosh, the first week of classes my freshman year, we're in ballet. And look, me and ballet.
Wait, of high school or
Of
undergrad?
college, of
Okay.
undergrad. Me and ballet, we have a very interesting relationship. I love it now though, but back then I was so insecure about myself, so just I'm not as good as everybody, or I don't meet that same level of technical level. But then there's also like my body looks different, I'm not as skinny, I have a big butt, like I have to wear a puff on my head and I can't put my hair in a ballet bun,
Right.
all of those black, those real Black things. And so I was like, you mentioned feeling othered. Like I felt so othered, but I knew that they weren't othering me. The people, my peers, they were so loving. It wasn't them. It was just the situation. It was just the way, like my
Their
life,
lifestyles.
the
were,
lifestyles
like,
and our
othering
lived
you.
experiences were so different. And
Yeah.
it was interesting.
No, yeah. And I think another part that I think is important to mention is this is not to say like these are just low income issues, because another aspect of like my time in high school that kind of irritated me about my situation was that I had a friend who was also she's white, low income, or what she claimed to be as low income. However, and she played a different instrument than me. And I think we talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, she was a little bit more upfront about her situation, like with our friend group, or really just in general to the people that she talked to, which wasn't a lot of people. But she was very upfront about the fact she was like, yeah, family just doesn't have enough money to do XYZ, da 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 da. And yet,
her not enough money was
not my
right.
Yeah,
it was
her low income was not my low income.
Right.
It was her low income was still higher than my low income. Like she's still able to afford a brand new instrument. I won't say which one.
Oh.
Yeah, but okay, sure. Sure. She's still able to afford a cello, a brand new one, and the more expensive like hard cases. And for a cello, like those are already large instruments, but the like fancy hard cases that go with them are almost the same cost as the instrument. And so she was able to afford all of that. And I'm like, I was so excited for her because it was gorgeous. But at the same time, I was also like, now, girl.
You're like questioning. You're like,
It's like, we are not the same low income.
Yeah.
It's like, you're poor, but I'm like, poor. I'm black poor.
Black poor. Black.
I am
black
I am black poor.
I am black poor.
It was like the poor behind me goes into a systemic issue, but the poor behind you is because you have multiple siblings in a 2-parent household.
Yeah.
Like, that's why you're where you're at.
Yeah, it's different.
Right.
It's
but
different.
like, if you had 2 less siblings, you'd be great. 2 less. I'm an only child. Like, we are not the same. So even then, like, feeling frustrated by things like that of like, oh, okay, right. At first you're telling me like, oh, we kind of share the same thing, and so I'm relating to you. But then you go do that.
Yeah.
And even able to go to like that youth summer camp that I was telling you about. It's like, right, okay.
Yeah.
We are not one and the same. We are not.
Yeah, there's a disconnect. So I had a question. Moving, as we get older and we're practicing arts administrators now and more developed in our careers, professional careers as artists and musicians. I'm assuming that maybe at some point, if we went into teaching, like, what would we do to try and make the experience for others be different than ours? Like, how are we making change within, or how would you go about making change within the field for young individuals who are in public education and want to be a part of the arts, but they're experiencing that thing of access, and I can't get new strings, or I can't afford new leotards, or whatever. How would you go about that?
Well, from like what I've seen already as an educator, and something that I kind of took away from like my secondary school mentor teacher, also shout out to him.
Hey.
He really, I don't know how to put it, but he kind of showed something that I wish I would have had. And the school that I was like student teaching at for secondary school, it's definitely an ideal New York school, but I think if other programs were able to incorporate this when they're thinking about their funding, they're thinking about the budget that they've been giving from admin, for his, he taught a number of beginner strings classes, because people have to have an arts class, and they were like, all right, I'm gonna take it just to get this credit out the way so I can graduate from high school and leave. But for those who actually continued as a strings student within orchestra at that school, you're then, if you don't have your own personal violin, cool, no problem. We have good instruments for you. Like, there was the kind that you use for a beginner strings, and then there are these almost professional grade or intermediate grade instruments, strings instruments, violin, viola, cello, and bass. All of them.
Wow.
For these students, including the strings. So if they broke a string, it's not their problem. We have it.
We can fix it.
Right. And they can take these instruments home. They're expected to take these instruments home. Of course, take care of them. But if they need their bow rehaired, cool. That school or he
will provide that service for you, so you're not having to pay
exactly.
for an outside
These students
service.
just had to, 1, practice, and 2, show up. And then he's also a conductor of an orchestra outside of that school. And he, of course, encourages, just like mine did, his students to audition. Guess what? He waives their fee. And like, it's known, he waives their fee because they're coming from that school, and there are other students who have a similar setup for that same orchestra or set of orchestras.
Yeah.
So that's not like classified information, y'all.
Right.
Let me
We're
clarify,
not exposing anybody.
that's not an exposure of any kind. Nonetheless, that's a waived fee by that organization. And I think when educators take that extra mile to create that access for their students, because it's already known that they can't afford that, that right there, that's that changing point for your student, because now they have access to, 1, better their skills. They're now, being exposed to other instrumentalists across, for at least for New York City,
Mm-hmm.
across the boroughs. But if it was in a different state,
Sorry.
it's different towns, different cities,
Yeah.
whatever. So that extra mile, taking that, seeing, what can I do for my students? And of course, not every school has the budget for their teachers to do it. And I recognize that.
But if
you have
yes,
do it.
Hypothetically speaking, if it was available, like, I think that would be so great for students. Because I also think it would be a very good incentive for school attendance. Like, we all know that schools get money if everyone shows up, essentially.
Right.
So I'm like, it's an incentive for attendance. It's an incentive to want to learn in general. Like, I mean, and there was a moment in high school where I wanted to be a part of the Black History show. And I was in it, and it was like 2 weeks before the show, but we had essays to write in English, and you couldn't perform unless you got 100 on your essay.
That's nuts.
It was a little while, but it was
crazy.
Like a really easy essay to write, so like it wasn't that bad. And she was trying to prepare us for the STAR test. But anyway, because I wanted to art, because I wanted to perform, because I had this drive to do this artistic thing within me, it made me do better within my academic classes. So yeah, that was that part. But I do think that if those things that were necessary for art were available for students when they came to school, and they weren't expected to purchase that outside of school, that would be so great. Because if you think about when you go to art class, or my experience,
like within visual arts,
there was like art class, orchestra, band, or whatever. Everybody went to art, but you decided if you wanted to do band, orchestra, or music. This was in elementary school. When we went to art, I didn't have to bring my own paint. I didn't have to bring my own pencils and paintbrushes and stuff.
No, nothing.
Right. All of it was there and provided for me. But with orchestra, it was like, make sure you have your own violin. And I completely understand that purchasing band instruments or violin instruments are way more expensive.
Incredibly
like, you're
expensive.
asking for a lot from the school, and it would take a lot from the budget. But again, hypothetically speaking, in an ideal world, like, that would be so great for students, because then they don't have to settle for less, or like settle into doing something that they're actually not interested in.
Right.
They have that access and availability to participate in their art and begin, that training at a young age. So
the financial aspect of it isn't something that they don't have to worry about. Right. And something their parents also don't have to worry about. They can be like, oh, you're interested in this, you're doing this? Cool. I'll sign you up.
Right.
It's easier on the parents as well when they know, okay, this isn't something I have to pay for unless I want to.
At least right now. Right.
Right. Like, students at that school that I was student teaching at, that I was student teaching at, if they were taking private lessons, they could, but that's out of pocket, because that's outside of school.
That's an extra expense.
That's their own thing. But the main thing that the students needed for access to participate in, symphony orchestra at that school, and you have the skill for it, whatever, that's provided to you. And if you're participating in other orchestras outside of it, you have an intermediate level instrument at your disposal.
Yeah, because they don't have to be, obviously, if you're purchasing these instruments en masse, like, obviously you can't afford like really, really 50 beautiful nice instruments, or 50 beautiful like Steinway and Sons pianos. Like, that's not possible. Right. But like, you have something, you have like a basic, something that can help build those basic skills. I was thinking about the same thing with dance. Like, I went to, there was some, actually, maybe there weren't. I'm trying to remember if students came to school with no dance clothes, or forgot their dance clothes, if there was like a bucket that they could go to and get dance clothes from. I want to say we had that in in middle school, maybe, but I know in high school we didn't. And I remember like there was a second where I was like a little mad at the program, because we weren't allowed to have holes in our tights. And if you got holes in your tights, like, you got points docked off. And I'm like, well, if I can't afford to go buy new tights, like it would be cool if there was like an inventory for students to at least supplement their tights for that day, you know,
Right.
and then maybe they're responsible for going home and washing them and bringing them back or whatever. But you know,
Yeah.
something for those students that if I can't afford this, you know, on my own, then that resource is available for me at a public school, you know,
Right.
especially.
Or even like the incentive, like for dance, at least, like, okay, each, at the beginning of each year, you're getting, we'll provide you with, I don't know, two
Mm-hmm.
leotards and like two sets of tights. And, or even at the beginning of like each marking period, based on whatever your school does, how it's set
Mm-hmm.
up. But even something like that, where it's like you're buying in bulk, and of course you get everyone's sizes ahead of
Mm-hmm.
time. The responsibility is on them to respond to you, of
Mm-hmm.
course. But, you're giving them that access to, okay, I'm starting you off with these things. So if there's students who are brand new and coming in with like, oh, I don't have any of that,
Mm-hmm.
cool. You now have
You
a
now
leotard. You
have that.
have the tights. You have at
At
least
least
two of
two.
each,
At
at
least
least
two.
two.
Right, exactly.
And you don't have to return that. That's yours to keep. And then, next year, you're going to get two more
Mm-hmm.
of each of those things.
Yeah.
So
So you're
your
yeah,
upkeep is on you,
right, exactly.
but you at least have those things
In the beginning,
in
even
the
if it
beginning,
is just two.
even if it is
Some is
just two.
better than nothing.
But you might, depending on how well or how hard you are on them, you might finish your 4 years off with like, what, 8 of each,
Mm-hmm.
depending on your, how your body works, how it fluctuates, whatever,
Yeah.
throughout those 4 years. But, you know, that's an option.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the kind of school you're going to, there's potentially room in the budget for
For
something like
yeah.
that. Um, so
Yeah.
it's just sometimes as educators we have to be a little creative,
And
and
sometimes you
yeah,
genuinely just have to go the extra
you
mile for
have to go.
students because and
It
you have
is
to recognize that not everybody in your classroom has the same opportunity, has the same, you know, finances, has the same, you know, we're not all the same. And the
exactly
quicker you recognize that, the quicker within your preparation for the school year, you can account for, okay, just in case I do have students that can't get school supplies, art supplies, whatever, I'll have that for them. I can be
right.
that support for them, you
Like you're
know?
not, you know, blindsided
Yeah,
by
because I'm sorry, if you're an
yeah,
educator, if you were at the front of a classroom and someone comes in and they're explaining, like, oh, I can't afford this, and you are absolutely like dumbfounded, like, you're like, oh, what do you mean? You know, like,
right.
I'm like,
Where's the DEI
I'm
training?
like, come on. I'm
Did we not go over this in PD?
right,
Like,
because I'm like, baby, come on out. Like,
yeah. And I think, like,
the DEI training, that was good.
no, because come on now. But I think there's more of that nowadays. Like, I can speak a little bit to some of the trainings that like my peers who are presently teaching have had to go through, and the courses we took in undergrad. Those are things that they were actively making us aware of
Mm-hmm.
all the time,
That's
all the time.
that's so
But
great.
like, I don't know, and I doubt that when like you and I were coming up, let's just say for craps and giggles, in elementary school,
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that teachers were getting the PD training that um,
It was.
encompasses these things of like, oh, you're going to have low income students.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're going to have students who maybe don't have access to these types of things, or they have these particular issues. And of course,
Yeah.
the school doesn't know that families are going through these particular things,
Right.
at least
Yeah,
within public
I
school.
definitely feel like it was different, and I feel like there
Mm-hmm.
has been the development of DEI trainings. I feel like have been better. Maybe, maybe I don't really know, y'all, but maybe I
Depends.
feel like they've been emphasized a little bit more. I also did go to a PWI for undergrad, so
Same.
like they highlighted DEI
So much.
so much,
So
you know.
much.
But I will say times are getting rough because in some states, Texas, Florida,
Ooh.
Oklahoma,
We gonna put bold, underline, and italics under Florida.
like like DEI is not
No,
required. It's
at all.
it's banned. It's literally like
Yeah,
against the law to teach DEI within schools, and it's just like
crazy.
what?
It's so incredibly crazy that like teaching inclusion is, and I think
It's
things
not
like that,
allowed.
it's
It's
not
not, it's not
allowed.
allowed. And I'm like,
And
that's not the world that we live in today. I'm like, can we
at all.
stop being like blind? Can we please stop being
No,
ignorant?
really.
And you're choosing the ignorance because you know that the reality of the world that we live in does
And the
not
economy of right now.
exactly. I'm like, majority of people out, even outside of black people, all Americans are struggling. It doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter. That does not matter. Everyone is struggling.
Right
And
now,
so I'm
yeah.
like, for you to make it illegal for teachers to be aware of the fact that like students are struggling. Yeah, you're essentially making it illegal for teachers to be aware of the fact and prohibiting like trainings and workshops that will teach students and teachers how to deal with that within the classroom. I'm like, education's going downhill. You know, like people are going to start dropping out. Like
No, yeah, because
it's
they're
going
going
to
to be faced with
snowball.
these more issues
Exactly.
and more
And
issues
there's no
with
way to deal with them.
access.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. So, wow. I just, you know what's so funny is that I feel like you just naturally end up being an educator when you come to teachers college. Like that wasn't necessarily the reason why I came.
And so if you weren't already an educator, you are.
Yeah, you're around
now.
it so much. It's just like you just start talking about education. But I wanted to flip this a little bit and from us talking about access within the schools to just access to dreaming and like feeling as if, for me as a dance, you know, for dancers, feeling as if making it to New York or making it to these certain places that are so rich in your art possible. Like I was thinking a lot about how dreaming is a privilege, like it really is, and it shouldn't be. Like I feel like everybody should be able to dream, like have the most radical dreams that and feel as if that is achievable, feel as if that's possible. But we all know the reality of that. It's not, which is why I say dreaming is a privilege. But I wanted us to speak about that a little bit because I know in my own experience, I never thought that me moving to New York or being up the street from the Met, Lincoln Center, American Ballet Theater, Ailey, like I never thought that was possible because in dance, and I'm curious if similar things exist within the orchestra music world, but dance, you know, there's like summer intensives.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's ideal, and some places it is required for students who are enrolled in their program to attend a summer intensive over the summer. But it's like there are a lot of things that come into play when it comes to attending a summer intensive. I know when I went to one of them, not only was I paying for, like, the one that I went to, it was in New York. Not only was I paying for the flights,
right,
but also the cost of the intensive, it was like 6 weeks, and that was like 2-3K. Also, living in New York, I'm paying rent, subleasing from someone for what, that's like a month and some change.
Yep.
Like, it's a lot. And for me, I knew that I was capable of dancing. Like, I knew that I had the potential to be so good, you know, like be in these companies. But there came a point where I was like, I actually might have to abandon this dream. It's not, the stars aren't aligning, and I'm not sure they ever will.
Right.
Like, so I just, I wanted us to talk about that a little bit, because it just like
yeah,
I don't, you know, I think, what was it, in our other episode we talked about someone leaving art because they want to, you know, that's, we had Kyle on here, you know, he was like, okay, you know, I love this thing, but there are my other interests.
Right.
There's like your own detachment from your art. It's your choice to exit it. But I don't think we talk about enough when you're forced to leave it because you cannot do it.
And you can't get in.
And you cannot get
in. And it's not because of your own
It's
personal
not because
skill.
of you.
It's not your
It's not
your
because
problem.
of you.
Well,
it's not your
yeah. It's your problem.
but it's not
your fault.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not your fault. It's other outlying factors that are prohibiting you from being able to access
to do
these
the
spaces.
thing that you want, access these spaces, do the things that you want, you know, do the thing that you really feel is a part of your purpose in life. But you can't do it because you cannot get there, can't get in. So I'm just like, in, with music, like, are there any like similar things? Like, I know you guys don't have summer intensive, but maybe
Well,
like
I
summer
mean,
orchestra camps
there are
or.
like intensives for like musicians.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of those, or even if you want to audition for like like a competition, and
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of those. However, most of the competitions for um I think I can really only speak to strings, but most of the competitions for those, every time I see ads for them or I'm like looking for one, those all I've seen are like in California.
Mm-hmm.
So for someone who is an East Coast girly, hi,
Yeah.
um, flying to
Yeah.
California,
That.
staying there. Well,
Mm.
if you get in, but even like doing like a camp, because aside from the youth one that I was talking about earlier, most of the camps as a musician that you could do over the summer,
Mm-hmm.
they are states away. There's
Mm-hmm.
stayover, but because they're a stayover camp, they're
Yeah.
even more money.
Right.
And it's like I
Housing,
just the how
food, lodge.
all of it. When
Mm-hmm.
listen, they'll tell you, oh, it's this much. When you see that total bill, no. Like there were like at least for me, like there were some things that like I was able to do because my grandparents, decided, okay, we are able to do this for you.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't constant nor was that often.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of things that I wasn't able to do. And going to like a music camp, and that was one thing I always wanted to do. I went to a music camp once.
Mm-hmm.
That was in middle school, and it was taught by my elementary/middle school instructor at that time. And that's because he was doing it, and it was through the school. We just had to say, okay, we want to do
We want to
this,
do
and it was
it.
for
Yeah.
2 weeks. It was right up the hill at the
Mm-hmm.
school, at the middle school, for 2 weeks with him,
Mm-hmm.
and it was free because we were students. And
Right.
even if we weren't his students, if we were coming from another school within the county, still free because
Mm-hmm.
we're still a part of the county. And it was only open to us. That's the only time. That's when I
Mm-hmm.
learned how to do like vibrato.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I learned. Um, but even just those 2 weeks, I was like, okay, I'm coming out already a better player.
Mm-hmm.
However, had I had, the financial access to these other
To the
things,
other
and
things, yeah.
as you get older, as your skill level gets more advanced, the intensives, the camps only get harder.
They
And
get
so
harder and they become more important
they
too, because
way
you
more
know that,
important.
okay, I need to go there so I can learn this certain skill.
Right. Like they're
You know.
expecting for me to be able to do this properly
Mm-hmm.
and knowledgeably.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can't go there,
Yeah, and I feel like there's a difference. Like you can see when someone is self-taught versus when someone is
oh, for sure.
like they went to
The
like a
technique.
studio or the
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 technique.
technique, and it really like I am so forever grateful for my mentor growing up, Miss Danielle. Shout out to Miss Danielle. Shout out to you. I love you. But yeah, I'm so grateful for this woman because again, I mentioned the difference between technique and self-taught. For so long, I was self-taught. It was I go to praise dance and
Mhm.
I learn what I can about dance from whoever my instructor is. But then after that, it was just like, oh, you go home and, maybe we watch some YouTube videos about dancers or whatever.
Right.
But this woman, she was the director of the dance program at PV in Houston.
Oh, cool.
And when I was like 8 to 12, I would say, she literally took me under her wing and she drove me to PV after like class or like over, no, I think it was over the summer. She drove me to PV over the summer. She was like, you're going to come with me and you're going to learn how to dance.
You love.
And I got to train with college students. They had technique. They had all the things that I wasn't able to get because I couldn't go to a studio and I was just relying on praise dance. But this woman, she really took the time to like sew into me, and because she saw like what I was capable of and she knew the barriers that were in place.
Right.
But she was like, you know what? I got you. I got you all for free too. She was just like, come on, girl.
Extra
I'm coming to your house at 7 a.m. Get in the car. We taking a drive. It was rough waking up. But I'm like,
Right.
I'm so thankful to her. And she's someone that I always like, well, you know, always will have in my heart, you know, especially as I reflect on my dance career, because I'm like, she was the beginning. She was the beginning of paving a way and making me realize that, okay, yes, there are barriers in place, but at the same time, there are ways to work around it. There are loopholes to get that you can go through to get to the same place that like other people can get to just by going to a studio, you know, like
Right.
she taught me that. And so I'm so appreciative
Yeah.
appreciative
Right.
of
You got it.
of her. Right.
You
there
got
we
it.
go.
No, but yeah, I think we're saying now, and not to say that it was few educators that were going the extra mile when we were younger, but I think now with this generation of educators that have been coming up, like I see my peers from my graduating class and undergrad who are now teaching, and you know, they'll talk about, because I'm not teaching right now. Um, but I see them talking about some of the things that they face and the different things that they try to do for their students. And for one, that makes me so proud of them, first of all, for being the educators to go the extra mile, because these are things we talked about, but it's one thing to talk about it,
But
and
then
it's another thing when you to do it. And they've
standing on business,
been doing that. So essentially, music ed class of 22 and also class of 23, because I have ones who I'm friends with who are teaching now too, that I see them going the extra mile. Shout out to y'all.
Shout out to all the educators that
shout out to all of them, truly,
that are going the
I'm
extra mile.
talking to y'all, but
No, right.
but also truly, like, for those that are going the extra mile, and it's a lot to go the extra mile,
It's a
especially
lot,
if
but
you're teaching in a
changing
school.
lives. Like you really are changing the lives. Like
Yeah.
like, and you know, sowing into these younger generations, like those are the ones that are going to be the world changers, you know,
Right.
when they grow up. And so it's very, very important.
It is, and it's necessary to acknowledge it. And it's also necessary to acknowledge that, like, there are obviously those who cannot go the extra mile, because going that extra mile as, like, an arts educator,
it's a lot.
Is you're taking away from your time as well.
And your money.
Your time,
And
sometimes your money,
yeah.
and even your other resources. And you already don't get a lot of any of those things as educators. So, like, this is not to praise you for, you know, I guess, what's the word that I'm looking for? Making the changes that policy and other things won't.
Yes, right.
And so, for the record, y'all are deserving of those.
Because
you're deserving of those.
Teachers shouldn't have to go the extra mile, because the policies in place and just like the education system in place should already be yes, they should already be doing that. They should
already be there, but they're not. And so, for those who are able to do that, we commend you. And for those who are not able
we commend
to
you
do
too,
that, you're also commended, because
you're doing the best that you can.
Exactly. You do what you can, and sometimes that is all you can do.
And honestly, just showing up is enough too.
Truly.
Like, just showing up, giving the best that you can. You know, like, I think a lot about, and we were watching this yesterday, but shout out to I.B.Artin Elementary, because
many
like,
shout outs this episode.
So good. But Barbara was explaining to Gregory, like, there are so many things that we cannot account for, you know, and in that context, you know, like, Gregory was trying to like plan out, you know, the specifics.
It was like season 2, episode 1.
Yeah, come on, she said, go watch the episode, y'all. Right. Gregory was like trying to explain the specifics of like plan out the specifics of the semester, and she was like, you can't do that. You can't do that. You know, like there are so many things that are in place that you can't just have this like blanket like blueprint for how you're gonna teach the classroom, how you're gonna whatever, because things come up. And relating that back to us, like you have students that have different levels of access, you know, so you can't just have this blanket one size fits all teaching approach. But she emphasized that we do the best that we can in the moment. You know, if one day this thing happens and the next thing something different, we adjust. But at the end of the day, we still chose to show up for these students, and we still chose to pour into them as best as we could in that moment, despite whatever situation was happening.
Right. And despite even your own personal setbacks
Mm-hmm.
and lack of resources as an educator.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really good episode for that. And also showing that like you can't plan for everything as an educator.
Right.
And I mean, they teach that in like our teacher training within however you obtained your, licensing or certification. But just reiterating that, because sometimes once you get into the thick of it as a teacher, you forget that you can't accommodate or plan
You
for
can't do
everything. You just
everything, yeah.
have to adjust
Adjust.
and
Yeah.
adjust well.
Mm-hmm.
Let me emphasize, adjust well.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think it's for, at least for the purpose of this episode, I think it's also important for us to kind of get into like a little bit
A
of the
little
history aspect.
yeah.
Yeah,
Because we're like saying, oh, it's built into the system or all of
whatever
this stuff, but now actually
Like,
providing the context.
yeah,
So
there is context behind it. These aren't just baseless claims.
right, we're
that
not just
making.
saying this because we're black and
you'd be like, oh my god, like we have issues.
right.
Yeah, we do have issues, and guess what?
We're not making these issues up
Right.
ourselves.
These were set before us. Before
exactly,
our time.
exactly. So just before we wrap it up, just a little bit
Sit
of
tight.
historical context. So basically, black and white, we all know slaves existed in the United States. And within the 17th century, as Africans were forced into the colonies, the population of Africans significantly exceeded the amount of white Englishmen in the colonies.
Mhm.
And so this is when we begin to see a clear separation between the two and a clear labeling between you are black and I am white. The term white came into existence during this time. And so during this period, there was a law that was passed that made it illegal for blacks to receive an education because white colonizers, they wanted, I read this book, it said a literal advantage over the black people, and not just black people, but all diverse peoples that were in the colonies at that time. And so here is that, that the passing of that law was literally like the catalyst to the systematic racism that exists within our educational system, because as the country was developing and the legality of slavery didn't even come into question until a century and a half later. So I'm like, during that century and a half, that was when that was a develop, the United States was becoming the United States then.
That's when there was that educational divide by race.
Exactly. And it was built into the system that was developing during the time. And so once we got to a place of, okay, we're separate but equal, and then after that with Brown v. Board, we are no longer separate, we're just equal, you can integrate whatever. That's why we still, even though we were becoming more integrated, we still saw a disconnect between the education that black Americans were receiving and then all diverse peoples versus white people, because it was built into the system. And so as that relates to art education, we see if I want to get dance training or art training or music, science, math, whatever, it just looks different for black individuals. So that's why we say like it's a systematic thing, because even then, as access increased, the quality of training was still different. The quality was it was different, because even in the North, when African Americans were able to attend school, the schools weren't better.
No,
they weren't better. They didn't have good teachers. They didn't have good facilities. They
didn't have updated resources. They didn't have updated books.
Food, all of this stuff. It was still very much unequal, even though we are moving towards integration. And so we still see and experience that effect today. Black Americans growing up as artists or trying to achieve the dream of being artists, like that's why it's systemic. That's why we're saying that, because it's built into the system, and these shared experiences. That's why Mars and I were able to start this podcast. It's not the fact that we're both artists, it's the fact that we're both black artists. Like, that needs to be highlighted for black for individuals that are listening in, or just to any artists that are in
Yeah.
the United States. But that Black experience is so unique, and we recognize that obviously other people can experience these issues.
Right.
Like, we're not here to say, oh, you're white, it means that you just have access to everything,
Everything.
or you can afford everything, because like Mars said in
Obviously.
that story earlier, like, there are white people that are low income also, and
Right.
all Americans are struggling no matter what your race is. But it's like
The
the
history behind
history
why
behind Black Americans
right.
specifically, and then looking at Black artists specifically, like, there's a historical context that stems all the way back to the 17th century,
Right.
as the colonies and as America was developing. So
Yeah.
that's our little history lesson.
Right. Because there's a domino effect when it comes to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people forget that. They're like, oh, well, history's in the past.
I'm like,
It's like, no,
no,
actually,
we're still.
the reason why we have the abilities to do some of the things that we do is because of what happened in history.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can have positive effects based off of history, there obviously
We
are
are
negative
still
effects.
experiencing, right? It's
And
it's
we're constantly
mm-hmm.
Black people, African Americans, whatever your identity is as a Black person, if you are one, there's still so many negative impacts
Mm-hmm.
from history
Mm-hmm.
that we are still solving and trying to identify and correct.
Yeah, if you're in just walking into a space, that going to a PWI as a Black person, like,
Yeah.
that uncomfort that you feel, like, that's because of the history,
Yeah.
like,
And if you know it, that makes you feel even more uncomfortable.
exactly. Driving and there's a cop that pulls you over, like,
Right.
like,
Right.
just examples that if you're not an artist that you can, resonate with, like, it's all because of history.
And that's the basis of it, really.
Yeah. But that's why we created this, like, podcast. I feel like that's what's so beautiful about this podcast, is that we're making it known that, like, we are the same. Like, you are not alone
Right.
in this, whether you are studying arts or
Or
whether
not.
you're an engineer, whether you're a scientist, whether you're a psychologist, like, whatever it is, and, like, you're a person of color, like, you aren't alone, because we all have this shared experience of being Black. And I think that we need to continue to have these conversations and, like, come together and story tell, make it known that, like, hey, like,
This is it.
this is
This
what's
is our
happening.
experience. These are how our cookies fell. These are how they crumbled.
Right.
And
And we can empower one another by recognizing these experiences. Like,
For
we're
sure.
not talking about it to then have a pity party and then be like, oh,
that's not what this
I'm just
is.
going to go sit and give up my art. No,
Right.
like, we going to keep fighting. We're going to keep going.
Right.
We're going to lean on one another
Right.
and keep it pushing.
And again, you still have that agency, as we've talked about in past episodes, to decide when you don't want to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is also, this part of this podcast is to remind you of, like, regardless of wherever you're at in your journey, you have the agency to stop
Mm-hmm.
and start.
Yes.
Um,
Because you want to.
yeah,
Because
because
you
you want to. And of course, like we discussed in this episode, there may be financial stoppings that
Mhm.
are happening. And, if that really is your main thing, like, there are resources. However, it's definitely harder as an adult who's struggling, I think, than as a child who's struggling, and it's more based off of your family. Because that, can kind of be offset maybe by education if you're able to. But as an adult, when it's just you, of course you might have some setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay that you have that setback and you might have to stop.
And talking about it. Like,
Yeah,
I think
and
that
being
that's
okay.
important, and not trying to pretend as if these setbacks don't exist.
Yeah.
Like,
Like everything's rainbows.
I would so rather someone, like, be straight up with me, tell me, hey, like, I can't afford this, rather than, like, pretend as if, it doesn't exist, because it's very real. And the more we start talking about it, the more we can become aware of the fact that it's not just them that are experiences that they're, but it's not that it's just them that can't afford it, but it's probably more, more people as well. Then we can bring that into the planning and the developing, of new systems or new workshops or trainings, whatever, to help make those people who cannot afford or who cannot whatever, make them feel seen and make them
Yeah.
feel heard, and make them know that, like, there's still a place for you, even though you're experiencing this,
For sure. So
That's it, y'all.
with that being said, that is the end of this episode. Thank you again for tuning in. And we always welcome questions. We welcome comments.
Yes.
We appreciate those who share kind of like how this connects to them and you know how they relate, or any questions that you might have, anything like that.
Drop it in the DMs, drop it on YouTube comments. Like, we do look, y'all.
We do look, and we appreciate it.
And thank you for the support, like, just for the podcast
gosh.
in general. When we released it a couple of Fridays ago, like, so many people were just like pouring out love for you know, for us and for the platform that, you know, that we're sewing into and all that stuff. So thank you guys so much.
Truly, we've kind of been like riding that high for a little bit.
Oh yeah, I feel like every episode it comes out, we're gonna be like, yes, let's celebrate again.
Right. So yeah, we just want to thank you all for the support and the continual support, and we'll see you next Friday.
We'll see you guys on next Friday. All right, bye.